Hey everyone, it's Sleepy Reader, Damien, coming at you with a look back at the New 52, I guess. Just a quick thing, quick for me. I mean, no deep thoughts, but I was thinking about how people, like in podcasts and elsewhere, talk about the New 52 being a failure, but it was a great success for me. My favorite books didn't always last, or they changed creators or whatever, but there were many shining moments. And so I thought I'd go through all the comics I could find, example comics of a series. I just went through my boxes and said, oh, I liked that one, I like this one. And then I decided to divide it up. There's also an honorable mentions pile, either things that were really cool but didn't quite work for me, or were spotty enough that I decided they were honorable mentions rather than full-on favorites of the New 52. So let me start with my honorable mentions, which first I have here on the little pile is Starfire. So I'm going to count DCU as part of New 52 because I'm thinking of Rebirth as the hard dividing line. Starfire had a lot of cool stuff going on. What really drove me reading all 12 issues of it was my daughter's interest in it. But while reading it with her, it kind of felt like it neither was right for her nor me. Maybe it would be right for someone in their 20s, I'm guessing, or maybe their late teens. But it had this unusual kind of funky charm. They captured a version of the character of Starfire really well. They sent her off to Key West, and it was kind of a book about hanging out at Key West and love affairs that never quite happened, and friendships, and just low-key fish-out-of-water jokes. And every issue was divided up into these cute little chapters that were just kind of fun, added to the fun. It had this fun rhythm, and some issues were almost, like Seinfeld, the show about nothing. I mean, not that the sense of humor at all resembles Seinfeld, but it was humorous throughout. But it wasn't afraid to be about nothing and to just have issues where characters are hanging out and stuff. So I consider it a very interesting comic book in the superhero genre. Then there was Justice League Dark, which became really good when Jeff Lemire jumped on it. It already had this great artist, Mikhail Janin, who all those of us who read DC just keep seeing more and more of him and loving him more and more. But the book kept feeling like it was gonna become great, but to me it never quite got up. It was always going uphill, but never quite reached a plateau of greatness or what have you. And then it just started colliding with events. So I think I dropped off of it when Forever Evil, or whatever it was that led up to Forever Evil, Trinity War began. So it might have got good again somewhere in there, but I had the sense that it was just wrapped up in the crossover continuity so much that it wasn't worth me going back to. So this was very close to being more than an also-ran, but it somehow just stays an also-ran in my mind. And it's kind of Jeff Lemire. Animal Man was another one of Jeff Lemire's big comics at DC that was really cool at first, but really sputtered out as it slowly wound up to the crossover that was called Rot World with Swamp Thing. And I feel like it never quite lived up to its potential. One could maybe say, the first 7 issues were kind of a golden moment, except that, in retrospect, all of them were leading up to the Rot World. I never dropped it. It was always worth reading, but it kind of felt a little downhill throughout. Although I kind of loved it again when Steve Pugh got on the art. He gave it a new life for a while. Anyway, that was a good also-ran. Dial H for me is a special case. I kind of hated it. I dropped it. But it was certainly unusual and different, being written by the author China Mieville, who I think was feeling the way, just beginning to learn how to write comics, really, because Dial H, as far as I know, was his first comic. He's a really well-known British novelist. But then I heard people saying it got a lot better, so I went and I got the issues that I missed, and I started reading again, and I was liking it, but I got behind on it, and so I still have never finished the Dial H run, but I'm kind of looking forward to finishing it. Maybe when I finish it, I'll change my mind, and it will be more than just an also ran of the New 52. Flash is another one like Justice League Dark that came so close to being... Like, there were certain issues where it was one of my favorite superhero comics of the month because it had such great art and it kind of had a fun feeling with the rogues, and I liked the way they did the character of Barry Allen, but there was always a sense of kind of fizzling, of incompletion in the plots. And as time went on, I realized there was a sense that it would never quite fully wrap up. I feel like this creative team did a better job here than they did later when they did a Detective Comics run, which I kind of gave up on. But so there were lots of delights to be had in this Flash run, and I'm quite torn now that I think about it, about having put it in the also ran pile. I think I'm pretty confident in making the J.H. Williams, W.H. Hayden, Blackman, plus sometimes other artists run a kind of also ran. And I think we all agree, or most people agree, that it became horrible after they left and Mark Andreyko took over the writing. But they had a run that went on pretty long, and there were some great issues, and any issue drawn by J.H. Williams was, of course, you know, an incredibly good investment in your artistic pleasure. Always well worth. I really enjoyed his portrayal of the meeting of Wonder Woman and Batwoman. But I never, you know, there were moments where I was getting into the story, but I never fully could get on board, and the story was so attenuated and stretched out over such a long time that I became kind of bored with this comic eventually. So that's why it's an also ran. Batgirl, another one really on the borderline. There were, you know, periods where there were 3 or 4, maybe even 5 issues. I'm talking about the Gail Simone Batgirl. Did I say Batwoman? Batgirl, before they rebooted her to much success, but I like the Gail Simone run better. And there were just some really wonderful moments, but then it kept getting snafu'd or screwed up by crossover events, and it didn't recover well from those. And I also feel like the series didn't conclude that well for me personally. But there were lots of high points, so it's a real borderline between honorable mention and just a comic book that I loved. So that's the honorable mentions. You know, if I thought longer and harder and deeper, there might be some other honorable mentions. I think like maybe Resurrection Man. In fact, I'd like to go back and reread all of Resurrection Man. I think I missed some issues, and that might even go in my, you know, favorites list. So a big favorite that I got kind of pulled onto kicking and screaming, because I just didn't believe that it would be that great, was I, Vampire. But a lot of people here on YouTube convinced me to read I, Vampire. So I think I jumped in a third of the way in the storyline or so, and I think I eventually read backwards. But it had an incredible... It was my introduction to Sorrentino. So it was just full of all kinds of Andrea Sorrentino artwork. It was also my introduction to Joshua Hale Fialkov, as far as I know. I don't think it's Fialkov's best work of the Fialkov work I've read, but it certainly was very good. So, for whatever reason with time, the reason why I'm showing to you first is that these are in rough order of favorites, although really kind of jumbled still. But I don't think about it very much anymore. I remember loving it while reading it, and I'm loving the art while looking at it. And maybe I should reread it sometime soon and just, really do it from beginning to end. And everyone was very upset when it ended, but it lasted a lot longer than many other series. There's lots of, there's ones that only lasted 7 issues. You know what I didn't dig up, which I should have put in here, so I'll just mention quickly, was the OMAC series, which lasted 7 issues or 8 issues. It lasted the exact same length that the original Jack Kirby series lasted. And it was kind of both an homage to Jack Kirby and his OMAC idea, and a bit of it just had its own wild goofiness that played off of some Kirbiness, and it also had a kind of Incredible Hulk kind of feel, which I liked too. Another one I liked a lot, it's kind of feels like a guilty pleasure somehow, but I really liked Captain Atom. And I remember distinctly it was because of YouTube that I started reading that. It was because of Audrey, a comic book mom, that I got on Captain Atom, and I really loved that. I don't remember how many issues it lasted. I'm guessing 12 at the most. And in some other comics, I haven't been a huge fan of Freddie Williams II's art, but I thought it was really great in Captain Atom. And it was written by J.T. Krull, a writer who I haven't really taken much notice of elsewhere. But I thought they did a lot of fun stuff in Captain Atom. Another one that was a total surprise to me was Red Lanterns. I actually kept jumping in and out of Red Lanterns. There's something about kind of bad guys, kind of good guys, driven by anger, that was really interesting to me. But it became really great when Charles Soule jumped on it and brought in Guy Gardner as the leader of the Red Lanterns and developed this really kind of cool Guy Gardner for our era, who had much more the vibe of a guy who would hang out at a biker bar than the old Guy Gardner. I don't even understand that old Guy Gardner with his weird haircut and everything. I don't think that's a thing anymore. So the whole run by Soule was really good. There was even this funny crossover issue that was a flip book. So there was a very cool period where Supergirl became a Red Lantern, and unfortunately that didn't last as long as I wish it had. And during that period, for a few issues, Supergirl was a really good comic. But anyway, so that was a real highlight. And then out of the quote DCU was a Bizarro miniseries, 6 issues of Bizarro, which was just the right amount. It was hilarious. And each issue they kind of dropped in on some old weird portion of the DC universe, like Jonah Hex or Zatanna. And it was just always funny, always inventive. I really hope to see this team of Corson and Duarte back somehow. I don't know if there's any plans for other comics by them. But they are great. And I'm not usually someone who seeks out comedy comics, but this just worked really well for me. It was all about a road trip with Jimmy Olsen and Bizarro across the country in their search for Canada, the Bizarro America. Okay, it would be ridiculous not to mention Scott Snyder's Batman. I loved Court of Owls with a little bit of question mark about the last issue, and then where's my Court of Owls? And then I loved the Death of the Family arc, which had some just incredibly brilliantly written issues. I guess both of these did, and of course always incredibly brilliant artwork from Greg Capullo. And then after that, so those are real highlights, and I mean that was I think a run of, if they just stopped at the end of Death of the Family, would have been a brilliant run. Then they did some okay stuff, and right at the end of their run, like issues 50 and 51 and 52, I found them a bit laughable. So they got kind of bad. Interesting still, but bad. But still, this makes the honor roll because of these incredible early story arcs. On the totally lighter side is Justice League 3000 and Justice League 3000 and... Oh, that's still Justice League 3000. But Justice League 3000 and Justice League 3001, which are really one series, so 15 issues of one and 12 issues of the other, so that's a nice run of, math in my head, 27 issues. The initial arc where they actually wrapped up their story neatly and did everything well, and the fact that this was hilarious and great art and just a really cool sci-fi vision altogether made this wonderful. And then it maybe sagged in certain parts, but it's ended really strongly. The last 3 or 4 issues of Justice League 3001 are very good too, so it leaves a very good feeling for me about this series. And probably just as long as you'd want it. Maybe they could, revisit it 5 years from now or something, but for now, I think that's good. One that I loved, just absolutely loved, so my favorite Jeff Lemire work of the New 52 was Frankenstein, Agent of Shade. And some people had trouble with Ponticelli's sometimes kind of rough-looking artwork, but I really loved his artwork too. And I just loved this sort of crazy Pulp Fiction adventures of the very noble and tragic Frankenstein's monster working for Shade and for Grandfather Time, or whatever his name was, who was in the body of a little girl. And eventually Matt Kindt took it over and did a good job too, although by then I guess the series was doomed. So I am... this is one of the saddest things when it ended for me. I think maybe 12, 13, 14 issues at most, but they were glorious issues, really good. Another one, another Charles Soule. The Charles Soule run on the Swamp Thing came after Scott Snyder. Scott Snyder's run was pretty good until Rot World kind of was still readable. I still enjoyed it, but Rot World kind of brought it down. But then Charles Soule went way above, in my opinion, in quality on the Swamp Thing. I haven't read every writer's Swamp Thing run. I wish I could find the time sometime to do that. It would be interesting. But of the Swamp Thing runs I read, this is second to Alan Moore, which is saying a lot. There's the final issue. So yeah, I really love that. I'm kind of sad that Charles Soule is at Marvel, because I haven't read a lot of what he's done at Marvel, but what I have read of his at Marvel has been less exciting to me. But he's still a great writer. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But so that was yet another highlight. I was kind of amazed as I look back. At first I thought I'd just have 3 or 4 highlights, but the highlights just keep coming. Earth 2, man, that was really good when James Robinson was writing it. And Nicola Scott, of course, was doing the art. There was just some knockout issues, and there were a few issues that flailed a little bit here and there, but overall it was really good. And then James Robinson was gone, and we got Tom Taylor on it, and it got even better. I mean, I didn't think it could get better than the James Robinson, but it did. It was just awesome. It was incredibly good. And I read it up till he basically wrapped up the story that had been started by Robinson, and then I think maybe in this issue here. And then I And then I dropped off of it because it became involved in, not Future's End, but World's End, and it wasn't really controlled by Tom Taylor anymore. But so, if this is the last issue, an incredibly good 26-issue run between those two writers. Really worth seeking out. All of these things are probably now very affordable to buy if you want to look for them in single issues, hunt them down in cheaper comic book shops and such, or get them in trades. Another awesome one was Grayson, co-written by Tim Seeley and Tom King. Most of the time the art by Mikhail Janin again. That was Janin, going up to a new level of just awesome. And I'm not even finding the really awesome pages, but you can take my word for it. And there was this really memorable, one of the best Future's End of Grayson that was told backwards. Almost all these issues had kind of standalone stories that were part of the larger arc. Now I was tempted to put Grayson in the also-rans. I just decided there were so many great standalone or roughly standalone stories that it deserved to be in the Ultimate Highlights, although it basically died in this last few months of the New 52 as the writers and artists left it, and some fill-in writers and artists were left to finish up the story. In fact, I plan to buy those last few issues cheaply sometime down the line, just to read them, to get the rest of the story, but I read the first issue or two by them, and it just didn't do a lot for me. So I decided to cut my losses there. But this is just amazing comic book work. Makes you love Tom King, and sets the stage for, I think, the rest of Tom King's so far very exciting career. And Tim Seeley's no slouch either. Okay, then, man, it's hard to say what my ultimate favorite was, but this is a strong contender of possibly best overall series of the New 52. Batman and Robin. So sad when it ended. Peter Tomasi and Gleason, Patrick Gleason, doing incredible art. Just turned the annoying character of Damian, by playing the father-son dynamic just right, suddenly made Damian and Bruce Wayne more interesting, and it was just an incredibly compelling story, in most issues for me. There were occasional slack issues, maybe due to events making them have to wrap things up quickly and such, but they always bounced back, and overall, I think over the course of 39 or 40 issues, it was just incredible. They had the very best of the Death in the Family tie-ins issues that kind of outdid Scott Snyder here in horror, and the rebirth of Damian was just amazing. So, yeah, a true comic book highlight for me in the world of superheroes of any era. And then it was followed up by the first 6 issues of Robin, Son of Batman, written and drawn by Pat Gleason. They were brilliant too. It was a bit of a shock at first because it really went off into a different zone that was more of a fantasy adventure story. And there was none of the father-son dynamic there. But it ended up having even better Patrick Gleason art and just such a fun, good story. Sadly, they had to wrap it up and go into the Robin War, so I just count those first 6 issues, which are one arc, as the brilliant, great stuff there. And so finally, possibly the best, but there are others. I can't really eliminate, I can't really just say one was the best, but the Cliff Chang, Brian Azzarello, Gordon Suzuka, Akins was also an artist on it frequently. Their brilliant, I think, 35-issue run on Wonder Woman. I know and agree with people, with purists who have problems with this, but it still was one of the best comics I've read in so long. To me, it had shades of kind of a Vertigo, Neil Gaiman feel, but it wasn't very much a superhero story, but it was a great sort of fairy tale mythology, adult horror story, with all kinds of issues mixed in. And I couldn't resist grabbing more covers for this than I did anything else. There were just so many great covers, and these are just a few randomly picked out that just grabbed my attention. I gotta show those. So if you haven't read this run, I would say seek it out in trades or issues or digital copies or whatever. It's just a real standout. Sadly, the writer who followed up on it was just probably not at all, at the level to take these oddball curves that they'd done to Wonder Woman, particularly making her the god of war, and know what to do with it next. Because, to me, clearly in here, she doesn't want to be the god of war. It's not in her nature. She's all about love here, as far as I can tell. And so something interesting is supposed to happen when the god of war is someone who should be the goddess of love, not romantic love, not erotic love, but of love thy neighbor. Anyway, that it would have been so cool if someone else with a lot of talent could have picked up the ball where Azzarello did it and bounced it around in a few other directions. But that didn't happen. But we have 35 great issues of that run. I mean, how many great 35-issue runs are there? Not that many. So, yeah. Looking at pulling all these comics out, and I'm pretty sure there's some I missed, and different people read different comics. I didn't read everything in the New 52, but all of those wowed me in a lot of different ways, and that's a lot of corporate comics that wowed me. So I feel like the New 52 was a success. Talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.